So just make sure, so you submit the form online, you fill it out, it gets submitted to the state, and the state will send you an email after you verify your email address, and they say, okay, now you need to print out this form, sign it, and mail it back to us. So just realize there's an extra step in that whole process. Just make sure. Well, I don't know that the deadline mailing it, you have to fill out the form within 10 days. I don't know when you have to mail it back, like if it could be right away. It's not clear in there. No, you have to email a signature, a signed copy, back to the state. Okay, so when you go to the Secretary of State page, you fill out the form, you submit it. There'll be an email that comes to you and says verify your email address. You verify the email address, and then they'll send you another email that says, hey, you need to print out this form and then sign it and then mail it back to us. Mail it back. Mail it back. And they give the address. It's all on there. It's actually pretty easy, but there's just there are a couple extra steps that I just want to make sure people are aware of.
All right, we got a guest speaker here, so we'll figure it out once he's done speaking.
All right, so I want to add, since I care about this topic too, for all of you, just that maybe the party should send out an email or some information just so that everyone is on the same page with clear instructions about what to do. Because as we saw with the Republican candidates for governor, and I've seen this in my time in Congress where people didn't fill out the right forms, didn't do the right thing, and then couldn't be on the ballot. So let's all make sure as a first step that we're all getting onto the ballot. That's the. Yeah, there was a sitting Thaddeus McCotter, was eliminated because he just didn't do the right stuff, and
bye-bye.
That happens. I think there have been others. I'm trying to. Did Benevolio have the situation? Oh, Benevolio took his spot, but then didn't Benevolio have another? I don't know. I don't remember. So. So who has run for office before? Okay, so we have a lot of people who are experienced running for office. Just as a baseline question, because I have run for office many times, obviously, but I want to know what are the things you're interested in? I'll just like open it up a little bit. Like, what do you want to know how can I help you in this process of running for office? Is someone, yeah.
Okay, I've run for the state position, I've run for state rep, I'm now running for the state senate, and I've had a few opportunities to find groups or to support groups that come out of control of their land. But finding these, I want to talk to the right people. Now, I know I'm not going to win. I'm important. I hate to say it, kind of like Robin with the casino. You know you're not going to win. However, finding the right venue, how did you find the right groups to talk to? How did you break through when you won that state election?
Mm-hmm.
Who were your constituents? Who were the people you brought in? Because nobody wanted you.
Yeah. So. Right. When I first ran for State House, I was definitely a total unknown. Now, I was running in a Republican primary, so it's a slightly different context, of course, that matters. But within the Republican primary, I was a total unknown. I was not expected to win. Nobody gave me any chance, really, of winning. And in fact, I was against the incumbent's wife. So this person I was running against, all they had to do was put out the same yard signs and actually try to confuse people as much as possible, making them think the incumbent was just running again. In fact, they did use the exact same signs and just blotted out the first name and changed it. So, which is probably some kind of campaign finance violation. So, what I would say is, I didn't listen to a lot of consultants. I think that what can happen when you are starting out is people will come to you and say, hey, we can help you with this. and they'll give you a lot of bad advice because they just view you as a customer who will put some money in their pockets. And if they don't really believe in you or your race, they're not going to really be all that interested in helping you. They'll just sort of mail it in. So you need to take it upon yourself to really do all the work. I think the most important thing you can have is friends and family who are willing to help you. That can go a long way. I think we, as candidates, often underestimate the advantage of having someone who is close to us, who's willing to spend time out there volunteering, going door to door, going to events. It's a big advantage. I would say that when I was first starting out, that was my biggest advantage, was that, did I what? Yes, I door-to-door people, but my biggest advantage was that I had friends and family who were willing to volunteer their time. Because in most of the races we're talking about, you're not going to have a lot of people who come in who from the outside who don't know you at all, who are willing to help you. And that was true for me running for State House. When you get to something like U.S. Congress, sometimes you can get a few more people who are helping you if you're running for governor or something like that. But certainly when you're running for an office that's a lower level office, it is hard to get all of those people to come and help you. So you do need to find people in your own life who will be willing to do that. It could be people from church, people in your family, people, your friends. I certainly brought all those people in, and we would spend time going door to door. When it comes to saving costs, which is important, right? Especially as libertarians, we don't have a lot of resources compared to the other parties. I did a lot of things on my own. And now you may not have the particular skills, but maybe you have a relative who has those skills. Maybe you've got a son or a daughter or a cousin or someone who has skills like that, or a good friend. So if to the extent I made like things to hang, like door hangers or mail pieces occasionally, I did those myself on my computer. I didn't hire a company to do those for me. I made those myself, and the only cost then was, of course, the printing. You have to print them and you have to mail them. But if you can cut out the cost of having a designer or some kind of outside consultant, I think that can help a lot, especially when you don't have the resources.
I'm in this business, so, and it's
Yeah.
not cheap, but if you were going to put resources anywhere, do you believe in the direct mail piece?
Yes. That's another thing I would say. Now, as libertarians, again, we don't have much in the way of resources. But especially when you're running for like state representative or county commission or some kind of office like that, or even U.S. Congress, direct mail is the best way to campaign. To the extent you can afford anything, if you're going to spend your money on something, I would spend it on direct mail. And I say this even in the year 2022, because the other sorts of, some stuff is not that expensive. Like if you can find a way to email people cheaply, of course, email them, right? If you can do it on your own without having some consultant and some whole organization that you have to pay. If you can find a way to do that and email a lot of people, by all means do it. But the reason I like direct mail, as opposed to people spending money on radio or TV and other things that people tend to spend money on. And for a lot of these races, of course, you won't have the resources to spend on TV anyways. But if I had to choose between the two, I would definitely choose mail over TV. And I had to do this. I made this decision a lot of times. There were times when I ran campaigns and barely did any TV, but I did a lot of direct mail. Because when you send mail to someone's house, they have to do something with it. And that is very different from people. Lots of people don't watch TV. Lots of people aren't browsing the internet all day. Like we might be on there a lot, or at least some of us. But there are lots of people who just do not spend a lot of time doing that. But everyone gets mail at their house. Everyone gets mail every day. I mean, probably some mail, or every other day or something. So people get mail occasionally, at least. Let's put it that way. And when mail comes to your house, you have to do something with it. You can't just leave it in the mailbox. It just piles up. So in the very least, you're going to throw it away. And in that second that you're throwing it away, you're looking at it because you have to look at what you're throwing away. You have to decide, do I want to throw this away? And believe me, they will throw away your mail pieces. But in that second that they're deciding to throw it away, they will look at your name. And the most important asset you have in the campaign is your name. Your name, your name, your name. If people see your name, that makes a big difference. And we all know this from our own experiences as voters. If we go to vote and we've never heard of the name, we're like, well, I'm not voting for this person. But if we've seen the name, we're more likely to say, yeah, this is probably someone who's good. Like in your mind, you do that. Why do I know this name? It must be someone who's prominent or someone who's running a pretty good campaign. I know this name, I recognize it. So, and the person may not be good, but that's how we think as human beings. It's inherent. So when I would send out mail or do door hangers, I did not spend a lot of time and energy on all the details about Justin Amash. Like, you know, Justin Amash did this and Justin Amash did that and here's what he's promising, et cetera, et cetera. I put Justin Amash in big letters and I would do something very simple, like one word, like principled. Just something to connect my name to an idea. That was the most important thing. And my name always appeared in the same font, you know, it was the same logo design every single time, and it was big. And on each piece, whether it was a door hanger or a mail piece, the name is taking up almost all of the space. Like on one side, I would say it would take up maybe 2/3 of the space, and on the other side, you're talking about maybe a third to a half of the space. So you got to have like a place for the address box too if you're doing mail. But on door hangers, it's like, you know, the name is almost the entire thing. Like just your name, because you want them to remember your name. They're not going to remember. If you put your name small, like I see this all the time, and I get campaign mail pieces even now from people, and I can't believe how bad they are. If your name is small and then all your details are on there, nobody's going to see that. They're throwing this mail piece away anyways. If you think they're sitting down to read, there are some people who will read it, but those are few and far between. The average voter is going to see your name or see the mail piece. If it doesn't have your name in big letters, they're just going to see the mail piece, they're going to throw it away. So you want to get your name across. I'm getting, for example, I've gotten these Americans for Prosperity mailers for Peter Meyer. And with all due respect to Americans for Prosperity, I'm stunned that on one side of the mail piece, it doesn't even include his name. And if you're trying to advertise for someone, you have got to put their name prominently everywhere. So there is going to be some segment of the population who doesn't flip the mail piece over. They just see the one side, it's kind of boring, and they throw it in the trash. They never even knew it was a Peter Meyer mailer. You always have to include the name big on all sides of whatever you're sending out. And I feel really strongly about that. So if I would give you one piece of advice, if you have resources to spend it on direct mail. This is, I think, easier the more local you go. Obviously, if you're running for a statewide office, the expenses start to add up to send out that much mail. And you have to make that calculation whether you have the resources to do such a thing. But to the extent you have resources, that's how I would spend it. And
If you could split between lists, I mean, again, there are a lot of people in any state senate. Did you send to everybody? Did you target?
no, we targeted as carefully as we could.
Okay. Did you target towards a registered Democrat?
So in my case, when I was running as a Republican, obviously in the primary, I'm targeting Republican primary voters. In the general, what I did was I targeted, so I moved away from the Republican primary. In the general, in the primary, you target the primary voters, but in the general, the way I did it was I moved away from the ones who I knew were diehard supporters, because I don't, like, there were certain people that I know are going to vote for me, and it's not as important to keep, I mean, I still sent the mail, of course, but I did not focus on them as much. I started to spread it out a little more to people who are more along the edges to try to bring people in. But yeah. So from a libertarian point of view, I would target people who are, I mean, I think it will depend a lot on your district. Like, what is your constituency? What do they look like? For example, libertarians can win over Trump people, though. So if you know you're going for some Trump people, or you have a very Trumpy area, you can design a mail piece that is going to win those people over, for sure, or a door hanger or whatever. But again, just make sure your name is the most prominent part, and then whatever description you want, keep it simple so that they associate it with you. You know, you might write something about free speech or whatever. It might be something very simple about what you believe in that will attract people who you think are of a particular demographic. But you might also have a constituency who's more democratic, and those can be libertarian voters too, depending on where you live. If you lived like in Wayne County, for example, you might have a lot of Democratic voters who might find libertarian policies on criminal justice reform, civil asset forfeiture, qualified immunity, a whole bunch of other issues might be very interesting to them. And in fact, they may be sick and tired of the Democrats promising them that they're going to do something about these things. They never do anything about it. So a libertarian in those areas might then target those issues. Whereas if you're in a very, more Trump nationalistic conservative area, you might focus on some other issues. So it obviously depends on who you think your constituency is.
What issues, that's kind of what I'm getting. I mean, you could almost say J.J. Lott in really small letters, I really think that stupid last president Trump was a jerk. And then
Yeah, that's probably not going to work for you. Yeah. Where do you live?
I live in North Portland.
North of Portland.
North of Portland, Michigan.
Yeah. So that's a pretty conservative area, right? Yeah.
Yeah, they really almost to a person, don't believe in the election.
Yeah.
The hard person, they really don't. It scares me that they are convinced, sincerely, that they won the election. So,
Yep.
they're no good answer to the truth, but I'm just looking for any clue to get something.
Yeah.
I'm not going to win, but I want a few votes. I got 5% of that once.
Yep. Let's go to the next question. So we got people lined up. So.
Thanks for coming out again.
Yeah. Thank you.
You raised some really good points yesterday on activism. And listening to Clint this morning, he did as well. And I'm wondering from your perspective, can an unknown candidate, a large area with a very limited budget, can they gain any traction, specifically through social media, podcasters, really gaining any kind of exposure without being to a large degree an activist, or even to the point of being outrageous? Probably not a boot on the head, but at some level of being outrageous or an activism to gain that traction. Is there another?
Well, I mean, I certainly didn't have, when I ran for state rep, and it's a different, I understand there's different context. I'm running a Republican primary, but within that context, within the Republican primary, I was also a total unknown and had no chance and had no real outside support or anything. It was very internal, my family, friends, people close to me. And I didn't have to be outrageous or anything. What I tried to do was just be who I am. Like, people were advising me on how to run a campaign, and they said, they wanted me to sort of dumb it down, actually, make it more establishment-y, if anything. So I don't advise that. I don't advise, you don't want to blend in with the pack. You don't want to be just another person running for office. But I don't think you need to go to the extreme and say, outrageous things or try to, sort of like clickbait people into voting for you. I don't think that's necessary. Often if you look at the kind of advertising we get from politicians, it's often very much the same stuff. Like, it's very bland, very generic, they support the troops, or they're going to help seniors. It's very generic. So stay away from that stuff, because I don't think that doesn't differentiate you. But for example, I focused heavily on just the principles of liberty To the extent I talked about things, I talked about limited government and economic freedom and individual liberty. And I talked about things like the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence. So I focused on things that I thought would differentiate me, and I didn't get into the other stuff that would make me more like a generic candidate. So I don't think you have to be outrageous, let me put it that way. But
Okay.
to the extent you have like friends in radio in your area or TV or people who can help you get on the air, that's good. But I think a lot of it is going to be just hard work. Like, I don't know which district you're talking about.
U.S. Congress District 8.
Okay.
So I'm talking
And
Genesee,
it's-
Saginaw, Bay City.
Right.
Huge area.
The districts have changed, so I don't even know. I don't know like how that all shakes out. But yes, it's a big area, and I think to the extent you can do things on the ground, getting to doors, getting to events, making sure that people know your name and see you at places, I think that's the best thing you can do, especially when you have limited resources.
Sure.
If you know there's a community event, try to be there. Make sure you have people there with your signs, with your T-shirts, whatever you have. But again, make sure your name is the most prominent thing. They see your name a lot of times, they start to recognize you. If they start to get sick of you, like they've seen too much of you, now you know you're in good shape. So what happened to me, for example, I would send out mail pieces and I'd go to doors. And when I was first going to doors, people didn't really recognize me. I sent out a few more mail pieces, kept going to doors. Eventually people were like, I'm so sick of like all the stuff I'm getting from you. When I started to hear people tell me that they were sick of my stuff and they're sick of seeing me and then I knew I was winning. Because you know you've saturated it, right? People recognize you, they know you. Yes, there are some people who will be annoyed at having seen you too much or seen your name too much. You knocked on their door for the third time and they're like, don't understand why you're doing this. But that's when you know you're in good shape. And in the other part of that is, while some people say they're sick of you, other people will start to really like you. They're like, oh, I'm so glad to see you again. It becomes, but you start to get the sense that you're getting traction.
Yeah, I just wanted, because you're bringing up direct mail earlier, and I think a lot of people think it may be out of their price range, which it can be, but I don't know if everyone here knows, I know you know it, that you can get the voter lists with the voter history. And for instance, in my district, we maybe have a 15% voter turnout. So instead of mailing to every registered voter, you can mail to the people that are actually going to be voting.
Yeah, that's right. If I wasn't clear about that, you don't have to mail to every single person. You figure out, you find a list, you figure out who's voting, and you can get that.
The city, the county clerk,
the
secretary of
the
state.
government will give you that.
That's a really, really, really important point.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, why mail to someone that never votes?
Yeah.
You can know that.
If someone never votes, the mail, maybe it makes a difference, maybe it doesn't. It probably doesn't, because they don't ever vote.
I was going to follow up though with a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
And then I'll step away. I'm just wondering, in your opinion, what's stronger? Face-to-face interaction or forms of advertising like mailings and literature?
To the extent you can get face-to-face, that's the best way to do it. Now, when you go door to door, I also want to say don't be discouraged. Most people will not answer their doors. Okay, it's not because of you, it's not because they don't necessarily like you. They might vote for you, but people don't like being bothered at their doors. Now, that doesn't mean it's not worthwhile, because when you go to the doors, if they don't answer, you leave something there. So you're distributing something. And you are going to doors, you should be focused on doors that you think are potential voters. So like we mentioned, get the list of people who have voted in elections. And especially if you can get lists of people you think will be potential Libertarian voters. They might have some attribute about them that you think Libertarians can win this person over. Then you can narrow the number of doors. You don't have to hit every door in the neighborhood. You might hit, a third of the doors, but those are the best doors to hit. And then when they don't answer, you just leave something for them. And when you start talking to someone at the door, don't get bogged down. sometimes people can talk to you and they want to talk to you for 20 minutes or something. You've got to keep moving because, and be polite about it, of course. But, you can give them a few minutes, but you can't spend half an hour at a door because you have to hit so many doors. So if you're spending a lot of time at one door, especially if it's someone you know is already with you or against you, like if they say like, I love you, you're so great, and you spend half an hour talking to them, yeah, that person's definitely going to vote for you or pretty close to it, but that's only one voter and you've missed some others. So you should be polite, give them a few minutes, especially if they're supportive of you, and then move on. And if someone's not supportive of you, also just be polite. It can be easy to, someone might say really mean things to you. I went to doors when people sometimes were very rude to me. So you don't have to be rude back. Be polite. Yeah, I would advise against it though. I would say if someone is rude to you, try to be respectful and just move on to the next door because it doesn't help you. You got to remember, people have cameras, they have doorbell cameras too now. The last thing you want is some kind of really negative interaction that's on video and then someone puts it out there and then it shows that you're like an insane person. So, be polite, be respectful, and just, move on to the next house. Yeah.
You guys much got into the topic of my question, but beyond the information from the county clerks about voting history, are there any other commonly available sources for information that you can use for targeting to get more specific than the common voter histories?
So I don't know the extent to which libertarians will have this stuff. In the past, like if you're running in one of the big parties, Republicans and Democrats, they of course have all sorts of outside resources, organizations that are putting together this information for you. So you don't have to go to the government for that information. The party itself might have that information, or just some kind of contractor, independent contractor you just hire will have that information. This is something that we have to do a better job of building as libertarians. And I don't know to the extent the party, I just don't know this information, whether the state party has any of this information or whether the national party has this information. But I would talk to them. I would talk to the party, state and national. I would also encourage people, if we don't have these resources now, we should develop these resources. That means when we go out and campaign, we have to start working together. The parties do this. Like the Republican Party, I know, having worked in the Republican Party, they work together. In other words, when you all go to doors or you send out mail, as you start to gather information about who's a supportive person and who's not, what the big parties tend to do is they share that information with each other. So they create a database that then in the next campaign is useful to them. So we need to start doing that kind of stuff. We need to start working together. You hit a particular area, maybe it means that you're not successful this election, but you gathered a lot of data. That data may be useful to someone in the next election. So we need to start working together on that stuff as a party. So to the extent you guys all go out and do things at doors or send mail and you get data, preserve that data. That data is important to have, and let's work together and combine it in some way.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
So I have 3 questions that are, I think, kind of quick. So recognizing who we are as far as resources. So opinion on signs, we're spending any money on that?
So I would say signs are worthwhile if you have the resources for it. But if it were, just talk about how I would campaign. I would place direct mail first, and I would place signs above TV. Now, this is hard for people to reconcile because all sorts of people who have the conventional wisdom about how to campaign will tell you the signs aren't really worth it, signs don't vote, they'll say, et cetera, et cetera. I think the signs can make a big difference. When I was running for State House, I remember explicitly that one of the things people always remarked about when I went around was how many signs I have. Now, the signs are not necessarily an indication that you have more votes, but it does show that you're very active, you're getting around in the community, and it creates its own like myth almost. Like people start to see the signs and they start to think, oh, he must have a lot of support. Look at all these signs everywhere. And then it allows, as there are more of your signs, then people also say, when you ask them, will you put up a sign, they're more likely to say yes if there's a whole bunch of other signs. If there's just one person in a neighborhood who's going to put up a Justin Amash sign, they'll be reluctant. But if there are already 30 Justin Amash signs in the neighborhood, they'll be like, sure, what's one more? They're like, they don't care. It doesn't bother them because their neighbors aren't going to be all offended or anything. You know, if their neighbors get offended, then they're offended at all the other neighbors too. So I would say, yeah, to the extent you can produce signs, and you don't have to, like, try to, again, always trying to find the cheapest way to do this stuff that still looks professional. I designed my own sign. I didn't ask a consultant to design it. I just went on my computer and designed the Justin Amash, both for State House and for Congress. I designed the sign myself. And then had someone print it out and put them up. And we put them up.
So the next one is parades. Is that worth doing?
Yes. Yeah, to the extent you can get out to parades, go do parades. And make sure when you're walking in a parade that people know that you are the candidate, right? It's easy, especially when you're running for a lower level office and people don't know much about the candidates. It's easy to not know which person here is the candidate. Is there a candidate here? So you've got to make sure that you are wearing the right T-shirts that show that, you know, like this is a group of people helping a candidate. You know, bring your family, bring your friends, bring people from church or whatever organization, you know, you might have people who can help you. Bring them, have them wear your T-shirts, and make sure you are identifiable as the candidate. I think a lot of candidates make the mistake when they walk in parades of sort of hiding or just like sitting back in a car and waving a little bit or something. You've got to work at these parades. If you want people to notice you, you've got to be moving around. And it is a little easier, of course. It's easier the younger you are, and it was easier in my 20s than it is now in my 40s. But and for those of you who are older, obviously it gets more difficult. But you're going to sweat, right? It's not. I see so many pictures of people at parades. I saw one recently again of our congressman, and he was wearing like a long sleeve shirt and long pants, and it's like 85 degrees outside, and you're walking in a parade. I would say that is not the way to dress at a parade. Wear shorts, wear a polo shirt or even a t-shirt. Like wear stuff that you're going to be comfortable in, because you have to move around and shake people's hands and talk to people and make sure that they notice that you are working hard for their vote. That will make a difference to them. People used to tell me all the time, the way you run around at parades, it made me feel like you really are going to work for us. Like you're into this. If you're just at a parade and you're sitting in a car and you're kind of like this and just like, you know, or you're wearing like a full suit. Like, don't wear a full suit to a parade, okay? I've seen candidates do this. Do not wear a suit to a parade. If you're wearing a suit and you're walking in a parade, I know, like, maybe you think it will make you look professional or whatever, but it doesn't work. It doesn't work, because you've got to move around, and you don't want to be like the boring person at the parade. You've got to be the energetic person. So, yes, do parades and be energetic there.
And then the final question is, the one thing we can all do are surveys.
And hand out candy.
Oh, candy, right.
Yes.
And you have to have literature too,
You
right?
don't have to hand out candy as the candidate, but make sure your team is handing out some candy and some literature, yeah.
Okay.
And one other thing we used to do at parades, we used to have signs. We'd carry around the Justin Amash yard signs, and right at the parade, we'd ask people, do you want a yard sign? And a lot of people would take them. So we would see people take the yard signs, and they go and put it in their yard. It's an easy way for them to get a yard sign. Sometimes it can be like cumbersome for them to ask for a yard sign. They have to go on your website and ask. Now they see you at a parade and you've got a bunch of yard signs, someone's just carrying them around. You say, do you want a yard sign? A lot of people will say, sure, I'll take one, because it's easier than having to request one. And then they just put it in their yard. And if they don't put it in the yard, they just leave it on the side of the road, and that's good for you too. If they just left it at the parade route and stuck it in the ground, that's a win too.
So the final question was about surveys. All of us will get lots of surveys, League of Women Voters, various newspapers and interest organizations. Not as many as you would get as if you're a Republican or a Democrat, obviously running, but is it wise to fill all of them out? Should you be selective in which one? Like if someone asks all the questions, they're all leading and that you clearly know what the answers are, is it best just to avoid those sorts of things? And I guess
Like surveys and questionnaires that different organizations put out.
Yeah.
I did not do too many of those because people in the modern era, if people want to know what your positions are, they can look you up, they can find you on the internet. There's all sorts of resources. In the old days, of course, when we were using just carrier pigeon and other things, like nobody knew anything about anyone. So you'd have to do all these questionnaires so they could find out about you. We don't even have there was no cell phones, so you couldn't figure things out about people. Nowadays, I don't think you have to worry about every single questionnaire. To the extent you have a major newspaper or something or a news organization that's doing a questionnaire, I would participate in that, especially if you know that the old party candidates are participating in it. But do you have to fill out every questionnaire? I don't think so. I think at the end of the day, it doesn't impact the election that much. But if the Grand Rapids Press were doing one, I would participate in that. That's how I felt, running in the Grand Rapids area. I'm going to be in the Grand Rapids Press questionnaire because I just want people to see that I'm doing the basic work of running for office, and that's one where they might notice. Whereas the League of Women Voters or whatever other questionnaires, they're not really going to notice that or care much about it. Yeah.
Justin, most of the candidates yesterday and today, I think, are going to decide that they want to spend $1,000 or less on their campaigns. And I don't know if there's any records of how much Libertarian candidates spend or not, but once you get over $1,000, as you know, there's paperwork that you have to fill out for the government, and they are tenacious in getting that information from you, and it better be pretty accurate. So my gut feeling is that maybe we should develop a budget for a campaign of $999 and give advice on how to spend that $999 on your campaign. Because if you, even yard signs that I think they're $7, $8 a piece now, it's been a while since I bought it. You and I have spent hundreds of thousands of dollars on campaigns, and so but most people here aren't going to get to that level, I assume. So how could we develop a budget for a $1,000 campaign that somebody could use as a guide for what they should do? Should they spend it all on their homemade brochures? I mean, even a purchase brochure is 75 cents. Spend $1,000 on that, and you get what, 1,300. I think that they could use some direction on how to spend $1,000.
So if I were first, we have to get to the point as a party where our campaigns are not just $1,000 or $999. So we have an obligation as candidates to start cultivating relationships with donors and people who might help support us as candidates. I think that's really important. I know as libertarians, maybe we're hesitant to do that stuff. But I think we need to get out there and make sure that we have that kind of donor support for our candidates, that we don't have to run $999 campaigns. Now, if the choice is between running a $1,000 campaign and $999, yes, do $999, because then you don't have to file the extra paperwork. But I would say if you're going to spend that kind of money, then the way to spend it is probably on something like a door hanger. And I say door hanger instead of just a handout, because it's a lot easier to just clip something onto a door than to worry about a handout where you got to stick it. I've had this situation where we'll just have a palm card or something, but it's very hard to actually leave at a door. You have to roll it up and kind of tuck it in ways, and it becomes complicated. If you have a door hanger, you can just clip it on. It's super easy. So if I had $999, I would spend it on producing that. I think you could print those out reasonably, especially for a small campaign. you could print out a whole bunch at a pretty reasonable price. You have to design it yourself if you're spending that kind of money, and you have to have volunteers, not, you don't have paid campaign workers. So you're going to have friends and family. And I would say, too, just so you know, to the extent I was running even these very big campaigns, most of the people who were helping me were not paid people. I had some paid people, but even for me running as a congressman, I was doing a lot of stuff with volunteer work, where people were just volunteering their time, and it was a lot of friends and family, because that's the most effective, and often me, just going around and putting things on doors and knocking on doors. So save the money where you can. If you can't afford to do direct mail, do something like a door hanger, because you have to have some material. Some material has to get to people's houses, in some way. And then of course, you've got to find wherever you can get free publicity. Might be podcasts, might be radio, might be TV, where someone interviews you. You can get onto a news program or something. To the extent you can do that stuff, do it. You have to have some signage, because you might go to or some T-shirts or something, because if you go to something like a parade or a community event, you want people to notice that you're there and to see that your campaign is there. So obviously, save your money as much as possible, like by doing the things you can do on your own. And then where you have to do stuff, just make sure you have door hangers and some signage and maybe some T-shirts for your volunteers.
Yeah, I agree with what you said. I do think maybe 5 or 10 good signs are quite important. That you put magnetic signs on the side of your car.
Yeah, we have those.
You can make a sign for the back of your car that looks like a piece of plywood back there, but you can at least put a sign on the back of your vehicle that gets a lot of attention. You can, if you have a sign that you can move around, that you can put on busy corners and stay with it, or try to keep them from being stolen or run over. I think a few nice signs are quite important. And my guy who advised me said, make your signs the color of the state highway direction signs, the caution signs, yellow and black, because our eyes are trained to go to the colors yellow and black along the sides of a road. So
I think you should, to the extent you have logos and signs, yes, make them eye-catching. When I was first running for office, all the political signs were blue. I don't know why this was the case. It's not like that long ago, but political signs were always blue. And when I ran for office, I decided to make my sign a bright red. And as a result, people noticed it. And maybe because it looked like a stop sign to people or something, but people's eyes were drawn to it. And like you said, with a bright yellow or something that catches your eye, I think is really important. But people have to be able to read your name. Don't ever lose sight of that. If they can't read your name, you have failed at sign making and at design. And I see this all the time with signs, where the sign is fine in many respects, but I can't tell what the person's name is. They didn't do enough of a job. If you have a sign that's like, this big, your name should cover almost the entire sign. Just make sure that your name is very clearly visible. And of course, people with short names have maybe an advantage. You can make bigger letters. So my name, fortunately, Justin Amash, it's not super long. I can put Justin Amash. It's pretty easy. People with a really long name, it's harder. The other thing I would say is, and I didn't mention this earlier, especially if you have a short name, use your first and last name. Use them both. Because when people go to vote, they are seeing your full name. They're not just seeing a last name. And there's some sense in which you just want to imprint this name in people's minds. And they might not even remember your last name, but they'll remember your first name. So just keep that in mind. To the extent you can do it as a candidate, use your first and last name on materials and on signs. I know some of you have probably already developed logos and other things, but if you're starting from scratch or you're thinking about a redesign, I always recommend, especially if your name is short enough, some of you might have super long names and it's like just impossible, you know, unless you use like a hyphen and like you have to go on a second line or a third line or whatever. But to the extent you have a reasonable name, no offense, to the extent you have like a name that fits reasonably on a sign, use your first and last name.
And a former Speaker of the House actually fastened a wagon, a family little red wagon, to the hood of his car and drove around when he campaigned to symbolize his pro-family, you know, nice guy kind of an image. So if you've got something in your campaign that might be a symbol for you, why, tie it to your car and put it somewhere where people can see it. So, thanks.
Thanks.
I'm curious about how to interact with the mass media. Like, for us, we're about to announce our candidate slate. Are we going to call up Fox TV and say, "Hey, Fox TV, you know, we have Buzma Ellison, or now running for governor," or do we? Because how do we do that? How do we go about? Also, for for maybe smaller campaigns, do we like contact our local TV station saying, "Hey, I'm running," or just wait for them to kind of find us, or?
So, when I was running for office, of course, it's a little bit different when you're running in a Republican primary because, of course, the party has not nominated you at that point, right? Nobody knows who the candidate. So you sort of announce your campaign on your own. The way we do it with conventions, we already know who the slate of candidates are. So I think this is something that maybe the state party could help coordinate to some extent with making announcements of like who our candidates are and sending it out to the media. I think some basic like just steps of professionalism that we can develop as an organization would go a long ways. If we just have a more organized system of media contacts. When I was a member of Congress, we of course had a media list, and if I wanted to get out some information, I could tell my staff, I've got some information I want to get out, and send it to all of the like local or state media. And we had a list of those people, and we'd emailed them all. They're not all going to bite on it, but if, for example, the state party or it could be national party too, but it makes more sense, I think, for a state party to do this, sent out an email to the major media outlets, you know, Detroit News, Detroit Free Press, Grand Rapids Press, all the TV stations, and said, these are our candidates, and also gave the media ways to reach these candidates. Like, if you want to contact them, here's their contact information. That can be helpful to us as a party because then there are people who will bite on that. If you send it out to a list of a lot of media people, someone is going to say, yeah, this will be interesting. I'm going to go talk to these people. I'm going to get them on an interview. That can be really helpful. You got to remember, a lot of times people in media are looking for stories too. They want to, you know, they've got to fill their quota essentially of their work. And someone's working on the politics beat, and they've got to get some politics stories in. And now the state party has sent them a list of all of our candidates, all of their information, you know, how to contact them. Yeah, so the candidates will get reached out to. And then we'd also have like a central contact, like you can contact the state party here. So I think that can be very helpful. You as a candidate need to be proactive too, right? Don't shy away from the media. Like, I know it's, we don't necessarily always like what the media are doing, but they are the people who can get information out for you, especially when you have a campaign that doesn't have a lot of resources. In many respects, working with the media is more important to us than it is to the big parties because they have the resources to run all of the TV ads and do all sorts of other things. So we need as much free advertising as possible. So to the extent you can develop good relationships with people in the media, I would say do it. I certainly worked hard to do that as a member of Congress and as a candidate, that I tried to make sure my relationships with media people were good. Even if I disagreed with some of the things that they were doing at times, I tried to make sure I had good local, state, national media contacts. Because a lot of times we're fighting an uphill battle against a lot of other people, and we don't need an additional slate of enemies. So you just try to be friendly with people, try to be respectful, and make as much of it as possible.
And if you're running like a statewide, I'm running for Wayne State University Board of Governors. What would be like the best use of money for trying to run a statewide campaign? As opposed to, I'm not for like a local campaign, but county commissioner, mailing, but for like something like that big.
Yeah, it makes it more challenging. That's the situation. The more we move to state level and we have limited resources, the more I think we as a party have to do our part. And it does become obviously a lot more complicated. If you have limited resources and you're running a statewide campaign, then you need to focus on finding as much free advertising and free marketing as possible. You will have to rely more on email and social media and other things than, say, a local candidate. And it makes sense anyways. Like, the more you're statewide, the more you'll have some publicity where you can make use of social media and other, sort of electronic outlets. The more, the more you're running like a very local campaign, the less you're going to have a lot of publicity, and the more you have to have like person-to-person contact. You're just going to have to meet them at their doors, make sure you're getting door hangers out or direct mail or whatever. And of course, the cost there is less than if you're running statewide. But yeah, just find as much free advertising as possible. And again, there's no perfect way to handle this. Like, we have to accept the fact that right now as a party, we don't have a lot of resources. We as libertarians just don't have a lot of resources. We need to work on that. We all need to work together on that and building that. And a lot of that will come from just the publicity we get from the national level. Like, what is LP National doing, and what are our candidates doing at the highest level of office? And to the extent we have candidates who are running statewide who might be able to get a little more publicity, like our governor candidate, or if we have a U.S. Senate candidate, or those kinds of candidates, they should use their platform to also promote the party as much as possible, to promote the Libertarian Party and to say we have other great candidates down the ballot and try to get the word out. Yeah.
Hi. I have two questions, technically three. So I'm just asking my two questions, and you can answer them however you want. One, what would you say is the best way to recruit volunteers, and how do you retain them? And second of all, learning from our mistakes, what is the greatest mistake you ever made and you would never do again?
That one's a tough one. I've made a lot of mistakes, but what's the greatest one?
Or any of them that you can cite. I mean, like, let's learn from the mistakes. Like, what would you not do? What you can do is obtain the 360.
Yeah.
What would we not do?
Okay. Well, what was your first question?
My first question is, how do you go about getting your volunteers and retaining them?
Yeah.
Find good
Yes.
ways.
I think the only way to have consistently good volunteers, especially for races like the kind we're talking about in this room, is to have them be someone who is close to you. It's got to be a family, friend, someone at church, someone who cares about you. If they don't care about you, they're not going to be a good volunteer. And quite often with our campaigns, you might be able to find like a few libertarians. I mean, but look, this is a state convention, and there's just not that many people here in the scheme of things. We're talking about the whole state of Michigan. So now imagine you're just running a campaign, especially like a local one. You can imagine how many people there will be to volunteer for you. It'll be fewer than the people in this room. So you have to find people who are close to you. That means reaching out to family, friends, co-workers, people at church, or whatever religious, organization you're a part of. It doesn't have to be a church. So just go out there and talk to people who care about you. I think that's the best way, because people who care about you will stick with you. And you don't need hundreds and hundreds. What you really need to find is about 5 or 10 really good people. Like 5 or 10 really good, loyal people who will work hard for you. This is especially the case for like a more of a local race, congressional or lower. 5 or 10 really good people who will go out there, and if you ask them, could you go volunteer on a few days a week or like a few days a month even? Like, could you just go walk some doors? And could you come to this parade with me? I've got a parade coming up. To the extent there are people who will do that, that's your best asset. Other people you can't really rely on. If it's a stranger who just signs up, maybe they'll be with you. They probably will not stick it out. That's my experience. Some will, but like those are very few and far between. I would say my biggest mistake when I think about it early on is that when I first started running for office, I didn't know much about running for office. I was like 26 or 27. I was pretty young. Didn't know much about running for office. And I initially hired some consultants, people who I thought could help advise. Because I was like, well, these people know about campaigning, and I don't know anything about campaigning. And I found that the consultants were consistently just at odds with what I wanted to do in a campaign in a way that ultimately was harmful to the campaign. When you campaign for office, you have to be you completely. The message has to reflect you. You can't have some consultant come in and tell you, and I think this is mostly not a problem for us as libertarians because we can't afford consultants. But to the extent you have people, say not even consultants, but you have someone who's advising you. If people are advising you to be someone you're not, don't listen to them. You have to be yourself. If you're not comfortable saying the thing or doing the thing, then don't do it. The message has to be your message. It has to reflect you because at the end of the day, you can't effectively run a campaign that you don't believe in. So when I was starting out, they gave me all sorts of advice on how to message, and you got to do this and say that, and this is the way you answer this, and all. I was like, no, and we just fired people. Like, okay, I don't need it anymore. And I pretty quickly went to a campaign that I was just running myself. Like, I was making the decisions, and I think that's a good thing. A lot of people who advise you on campaigning will tell you, no, you can't be making the decisions. You have to have someone telling you what to do. You need someone who's an expert in this telling you how to run the campaign. I completely disagree. You are the expert about you, and you are the brand. You're promoting yourself. You're saying, vote for me. I'm the thing you need. So if you don't believe in the brand, like if you're trying to sell something that you're not, it won't work out. So be yourself, trust your own messaging, and put that out there. So like just to be clear, like when I was running, I really wanted to run on very libertarian themes. And I was running in a Republican primary, and I got a lot of pushback. Oh, that won't work. You can't run as like a libertarian like this in a Republican primary. It just doesn't work. And I said, look, this is who I am. This is how I'm going to run. And if people don't want to vote for me based on the way I'm running, then I don't want to be in office anyway. I only want to be elected based on what I ran on. And I used to tell people that all the time after I was elected too. I ran a campaign on these principles. And people voted for me based on these principles. If you don't like it, don't vote for me. If you like what I'm doing, keep voting for me. If you don't like what I'm doing, don't vote for me. But these are my principles, and that's how I'm going to serve in office. So just stay true to yourself.
So a few moments ago, you were talking about what type of free publicity that we could get and kind of figuring out what our greatest resource is. And I think our greatest resource is you. Don't you have a podcast?
I do have a podcast, yeah.
Yeah. And you could organize a interview with somebody running for a state office, right? So maybe we can connect those people with you before
Yeah.
you go.
I think that's definitely a possibility. Now, while my podcast
Definitely a
hold on.
possibility.
While my podcast has had some political people on there, I'll be forward with you guys that I never intended it to be a political podcast. Like my no, I know, but my dream was to have a podcast where I talk to people about like, they're, working as an Uber driver or like, just I want to talk to people about the world, I never wanted it to become here's a podcast about politics, but I have had a lot of my contacts are obviously political people, so I've had a lot of political discussion, but I've been hesitant to bring candidates on and say let's talk about your campaign, because then it becomes more of just a political thing, but I will consider it. Thanks. If you're an Uber driver running for office, that would. Yeah, go ahead.
Mine's kind of an uncomfortable topic here, so I apologize if this is one of the things we're not supposed to talk about, but can we talk about fundraising and how to ask people for money? I find that a lot of, especially first-time candidates, are really bad about that. They either do it wrong or they don't do it at all. And I was wondering if you could address that for them. I'm not a candidate.
Yes. So when you're asking people for money, I think you need to be very direct, and you need to explain to them why you need the resources and what you're going to do with the resources. If you go in asking and sounding like, you're begging them or this is a losing effort, and you're not realistic with them. You also don't want to tell them, like a whole bunch of BS about how you're way out in front and all this stuff when you're not. Just be realistic with them about what you believe you can achieve with the campaign. There are a lot of people who will want to support you even if you can't win, if they think you will run a serious effort and you will help spread a message that they care about. So I think just be very direct with them, and you can't be shy when you ask. Just come up with whatever the number you think it is that you need from that person and ask them for it. Like, if you need $200 from someone and you think they can give you $200, ask them, could you support me with $200? And tell them what you'll use it for. If you say something like, is there any way you think you could maybe help out, with some money or whatever? They're not going to help you. You can't seem sheepish about it or you're not deserving of it. You've got to be very direct. So that's my advice. Most of the asks you're going to make are probably not going to be huge dollar amounts, right? But it might be significant for the person you're asking. But the types of asks we're usually making we're not asking for tens of thousands of dollars or anything typically. But if you do have a friend who has tens of thousands of dollars to give you, then I would, within the campaign contribution limits, of course, yeah. Then you can ask for that. But I would just say be very confident, be direct, tell them what you're going to use it for, and be realistic about what's going to happen. That don't underplay it, don't overplay it. Just tell them what you think is going to happen if you have these resources. And I've been trying to help people to I've had people who have come to me and said, could you help me get resources? Could you help me talk to a donor? And I've said, sure, I'll help you. And just tell the donor, I've told the donor what this person needs the resources for. If the person doesn't get these resources, they will not be able to make the ballot. And we need this person to be on the ballot. Because if we're going to make any impact, we at least have to be on the ballot. That donor then says, sure, I want to make sure that we have a Libertarian on the ballot. I think that's important. So you've given them some clear objective, what you're going to use it for, and how it's going to be useful. It doesn't mean that the person's going to win the election necessarily or anything, but there are donors out there who just want to see libertarians compete. And as long as you seem serious and you're going to compete and you've given them some clear direction about how you'll use the resources, you'll find that a lot of people will be willing to give you money. Yeah.
I guess I was informed this should be the last question, but I believe I've heard you in some of your other interviews talk about the importance of infrastructure for running campaigns and such. I think today talking about the network of kind of close family and friends to support would maybe be a form of that. Can you speak to further steps that can be taken towards what you see as needed as infrastructure and kind of the first steps towards that?
I think the whole party needs better infrastructure. And obviously this is something that we're all going to have to deal with, and it's going to be a challenge for all of us. But it really is going to start at the national level. At the end of the day, whatever splash the national level can make, and of course they're trying something new now, and so we'll see if it works or doesn't work. But whatever splash the national level can make impacts all of us. I think that political parties really are, in some sense, national entities. They're national brands. And to the extent our national candidates or our national party are having difficulties, and we have had challenges for 50 years. The most we've had in a presidential election is like 3%. To the extent we're facing those challenges, it will always be difficult for us. Because the brand that people see when they go out there, they see the presidential candidate. They see the national party at times. They see national spokespeople. So that all trickles down to us. So we have to do our part to be supportive of efforts. I've been direct where I think the strategy's wrong. Of course, I talked about this yesterday, where I think we're maybe making mistakes in strategy. But we all should try to work together. We're all one team here working together. We need to be supportive of each other. That's why, it was upsetting to me when we had the new leadership, and then a lot of libertarians said, well, I'm out. I don't want to be a part of the party anymore. I think we need to give everyone a chance, right? When we elect new people, we give them a chance. We see how they do as leaders. And we need to try to work together. If people leave the party because they don't like something in leadership, that's not going to help the party change in the right direction. So let's stick together, work together, and try to be supportive to the extent we can, and then be direct. Like I haven't been shy about saying where I think there are mistakes, but I've also not taking direct aim at, I'm not going out and attacking people online or anything, but I've been very clear about where I stand, and I've had discussions with people in national leadership about where I stand, just as I did with the previous national leadership. I would call them up and talk to them and say, I think you're doing this wrong, or I think you can do this better, or I really like this thing that you're doing. And so let's all work together and develop that, because at the end of the day, if the national leadership isn't there, we're going to all have trouble. And that's where most of our resources are going to come from ultimately. It's building a national brand. I've said this about, if you look at every major political party in history, and of course, the Republicans and Democrats have dominated for, over 150 years. But if you look at the major political parties in history, they do not come about, they didn't become prominent because, we got 1,000 people elected to county commission. They got prominent because of some major national issue, like Lincoln with the Republican Party, in the Civil War era, or the feud between the Federalists and the Democratic Republicans in the early days. Those were national figures fighting national battles, and it trickled down to the local level. So we are highly dependent on them for our resources. This isn't going to change overnight. I don't think you're going to have a situation where all of a sudden our great county commissioner candidates are donors are just throwing money at us, but national is still only getting 1% or 2%. It just doesn't make any sense. We're not going to be having a whole bunch of money thrown at us while they're not succeeding. because it's all one big entity in a sense. So let's try to be supportive of each other and be understanding. And I'm not saying let's wait forever. But this is like a 5-year project, right? To get this thing on track. I don't think it's a 10-year project or a 20-year project, but it's like a 5-year project. And we'll have to see if we can get things on track. If it takes another 10 years and we're still where we are, I don't know. I think we're in trouble as a party because we've been around for 50 years. And I understand we have a two-party system. Like that's the way the system filters it down to 2 parties, but it doesn't have to be these 2 parties. It doesn't have to be the Republicans and the Democrats. So let's try to support each other. And I've talked about electoral reform too, to the extent we can get work as on the outside as activists. To the extent we can work on electoral reform, I think that's really important, and we'll make maybe the biggest impact. Having some kind of new system for electing people. If you take I'll give you an example. If I ran for as a Libertarian in my old 3rd district, like last election, if I had run, I would say it's a toss-up. It'll be a toss-up. It's like a 3-way split. If you had ranked choice voting, I win it in a landslide. Now, I wasn't interested in running, but we know that because we had been polling the district, that if in any 2-way race, me versus the Republican or me versus the Democrat in that district, I was blowing away the competition, blowing them away. In a 3-way race, as a Libertarian, it's a tie. Ranked choice voting gives us the chance to have some of our candidates get into that 2-person race, because you beat out one of the other candidates, and you get into that runoff, and you have a chance at doing it. So it will create more 2-person races for us. Yeah. Yeah. Did you have a? Oh, you waved him off. Is it quick? Yeah, go ahead.
Someone gave a talk yesterday about the history of the LPMs, where we actually where we had success and got people elected. And we had the most success in areas where there was choose all of the above that you like. That's called approval voting. And so this topic is coming up now, and then yesterday, it seems like there's some debate about how to actually win.
Yeah. So, are there districts with approval voting? Okay, so here's my issue with approval voting, and I'm not settled on which electoral reform is the best form, but I just want to quickly say that I'm afraid that if you made approval voting widespread, if it became like the norm, it would start to be gamed. Like people would start in their minds to game it out. Well, I think you'd end up with the same thing with the Republicans and Democrats starting to dominate it, because people would start to game out, well, if I vote for the Libertarian candidate, it might undermine the overall system. With ranked choice voting, because you are ordering them, you're creating a preference system, people don't have that same worry anymore, because you've now created an order, like this person is the one I want first, and then second I want this person, and third I want this person. I do worry about the psychology of approval voting. Like, I can imagine, I just think about this, I hadn't thought about this until a few weeks ago. I was reading more about it. And I do worry about some of the psychology of it. And I was thinking about what I might do if I were a voter, and thinking in a world of approval voting, I might start to game it out and say well, I don't want to give this vote to this person, even though I like this person, but I know that it might actually undermine my ability to get the first person I want. And so there is the gaming that will start to happen that you don't have with ranked choice voting. So In any case, that's a debate that's open, and we could have that debate for a while. Whatever the case, we need some different version of the voting where it's not just first past the post. So, thank you so much.